Your hosts have earned a reputation as fierce and effective advocates inside and outside of the courtroom. Our partners are experienced trial attorneys who have been board certified in family law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization.
Thanks for tuning in to the For Better, Worse, or Divorce podcast, where we provide you tips and insight on how to navigate divorce and child custody situations. I'm Brian Walters, partner at Walters Gilbreath, PLLC. Today I'm with Cody Breunig, founder of Black Dog Forensics in Houston. Cody and his team specialize in uncovering and analyzing digital evidence, which often plays a critical role in divorce and family law cases, as I can attest to. We're excited to have him today on the show to share how forensic technology can impact such cases. So welcome in, Cody.
Brian, thank you for having me.
You bet. You and I first met on a case that I kind of inherited and worked with you on that case through trial. And actually, I can announce that after a very long case, case is officially over as of last week. So we're finally done with that one. But certainly, we're very, very helpful with that. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your background personally, and then, of course, more specifically about Black Dog Forensics when you get to that.
Absolutely. My background is a little bit interesting. I started out, I went in the military at 17. I was one of those that had my parents, or talked my parents into signing me away. They had no other choice, essentially. So I went in the military at 17, went right into the infantry. When I got out, I went into law enforcement, and then found myself in law enforcement doing a very unique area, eventually getting involved in human trafficking, getting involved in rescue of children, a lot of things that had a technology-related nexus to it, as you can imagine. And then found myself eventually branching out into the civil side and leaving the law enforcement or criminal world, where fast forward a couple of decades and founded a company called Black Dog Forensics, where we specialize in digital forensics. And for those of your listeners who don't know, digital forensics is a fancy way of saying that we look at electronic data to figure out what happened and tell its story, most of the time, in court, whether that's criminal or civil.
Agreed. So, I've been around doing this long enough when, before there was that much forensic evidence, right? If you were trying to figure out if your spouse had an affair, you might have to hire like a PI or follow them around, take a picture of them going into a hotel room, or if you had money missing, I don't know what you do in that case. You might have to go get the physical bank records from the bank or something like that. It was definitely a different world than we live in now. I tell people these days that everything you need to know about somebody's probably on their phone. That's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but it's probably a lot of truth to that. But the problem is, well, how do we know what's on that, or what's there, or what, how do we get it into a form that can be evidence in a courtroom, which is very different than just, I looked at my wife's phone and I saw she was texting this guy, right? That's not really going to get you anywhere in a courtroom. So let's talk a bit about the types of, I guess we'll stick with family law and divorce stuff, but what are the most common types of evidence that you get asked to find out about or deal with?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit it right on the head as far as our devices, right? Our spouses know a lot about us, but what's one thing that probably accompanies us everywhere in life? And it's probably your cell phone for the most part, right? Your cell phone knows more about you than oftentimes you might know about yourself. It knows your dirty, dark secrets, and it knows everything else. And the reality is most people have probably never told their phone where they work or where they live. But every day, if you jump in your car, it gives you a suggestion. It's going to take you X amount of minutes to get to work or X amount of minutes to get home. And it's going to tell you, hey, you probably want to open this app right now if you're doing something, because it's learned that much about you without you telling it, right? And it goes the same for pretty much anything. If we're going to stick to just civil or stick to just divorce, it gets into, as you said, obviously there's a lot of infidelity and things along those lines. But there's often a lot of people moving and hiding money and doing different things like that. And it's actually a lot easier. We do it in family law cases, elder law cases where somebody may pass away, but essentially where you've got to understand somebody's financial assets. They probably looked at it from a phone or a computer. And, when you do your disclosures, you can kind of go and compare all of the financial logins that we may find on a device or a cell phone or a computer and say, wait a minute, I don't see this being disclosed. What is this? And then it's a matter of running paper to figure out if there's actually accounts open at those financial institutions.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's take a couple of kind of practical examples and walk through them. Let's say, I have a client who has a suspicion their wife was having an affair. So I think on my end, what I would do is I'd go to you and say, look, how do we prove that? And if we're going on the basic concept of your phone or your devices or whatever knows all, what kind of information would you want to get? What would you need from a lawyer to help you get that? And then typically, let's walk through a couple scenarios. Let's talk about the affair one first. We'll talk about the money one next. But what are the kind of things that you might be able to find in searching through that evidence? Let's assume you got all of it that you asked for.
Yeah, at the end of the day, too, we always kind of start these things of saying, where do we want to end up? And we want to end up with something that we can use in court, right? It does no good for me to come up with evidence that is pointless or worthless, right? So we've got to, one, collect data in a manner that is defensible and legal. That's a big one, right? And so that's done through a number of ways. I've had courts demand that cellular devices get turned over, whether it's the spouses. Oftentimes I've seen it on kids' devices, right? Especially if there's kids involved in a situation. Parents and kids are going back and forth at each other's houses. The court might, assign an attorney to them, and that attorney might demand that we get that child's device to look at. But going on the realm of, a spouse's phone, you can do that sometimes through demand. A lot of times it's mutual and through an ESI protocol. So that's some sort of an agreement that says, hey, we're going to look at both devices, or we may look at your device. There's instances where, we believe there might be something going on. And as part of, and obviously you probably have dealt with this, but sometimes it's actually written into prenumps that investigations can be looked at and digital devices can be turned over. So it's as creative as lawyers can be to get that device and that data to me in a sound manner. I've had them go on the stance of saying, look, it's community property or somebody pays the bill. I always caution with that, right? At the end of the day, you're the one who has to defend against that. Courts don't necessarily look at it that way, right? So I would recommend whatever it is, it's through some sort of agreed protocol or something that you're going to feel comfortable defending whatever data I actually collect from that computer or cell phone and actually get it into the court of law. Now, computers, that's a lot different story, right? There's community property on computers, but cell phones kind of hard to defend in that stance. But then it doesn't just end on the digital devices, right? There's the cloud out there where there's all sorts of dating profiles, there's all sorts of social media, and that data can be collected as well, right? There's public facing and there's private, meaning that they have to be a friend or connected, right? So there's case law around connecting to somebody's social media, pretending to be somebody else, right? And how you go about it. At least on the criminal side, you got to be very careful of the admissibility of that. A little bit easier standard prima facie type that we can use that in a civil setting. But to those degrees, those are all different avenues we want to really kind of investigate what is the overall understanding. And then from there, we kind of sit down and say, all right, this is potentially the roadmap and the boundaries you want to stick in with the end goal of being just that. We want to introduce it as evidence in a court of law.
So let's talk about some kind of practical aspects of things. So I know let's say I have a client who knows, there's about to be a divorce, and they go in and they delete all their messages with their girlfriend. Let's just say that on a regular messaging app, their text messages. Let's start with the easy stuff. Or maybe that's easy. Let me start with the basics. They eliminate all their records of all the calls, all the text with their girlfriend or boyfriend. can we find out, A, whether those ever occurred? B, can we recreate them? Not phone calls, probably, but text, that kind of thing. Go ahead.
Great question, right? We get that all the time. And, I'm going to take the stance of an iPhone because a lot of users that we deal with typically tend to be iPhone users. And so iPhones are really tricky in the stance of what they record about us and when you delete data, whether or not you can recover it. So let's talk about the newest generation iPhone and the newest OS out there. It gets more complicated because if you start changing iPhones and you start changing older iPhones with older OSs, it can change. But let's just take those assumptions into place. To answer your question, can you technically recover the full deleted content of the message, i.e., hey, have a good morning, I'm thinking about you, right? Chances are you may not cover that from the cellular device itself. But the great thing about Apple is that it's a cohesive cloud that likes to talk to its other devices out there. You probably have had a number of cases come to you. I found out my husband is doing this because he's left his iPad at home and I see these messages pop up. I'm sure you've heard that story.
Or the kids' iPad.
Kids' devices.
Even more frequently. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's, just because it's been deleted from their phone doesn't necessarily mean they're might be another avenue to look at. But just because the content is deleted doesn't mean the fact that it occurred is deleted, which is oftentimes just as damning, especially in criminal matters, which we'll stay away from. But the fact that communication occurred and the degree of that communication and the times, that is often paints a story. Now, on top of that, we haven't even talked about or brought in location data, but I often use location data so much of these times, right? When either spouse is supposed to be working during the day and we get access to their phone and find, lo and behold, they're at their boyfriend or girlfriend's house at 3-hour block during the middle of the day, right? These things have what's called biome data. And so Apple it tracks your location for the better part of a couple of months with a real degree of certainty within a couple of meters of where you are every couple of seconds. So you can literally paint a picture and says, hey, Cody Breunig left the office. He went and stopped and got a car wash and then went by H-E-B and picked up some steaks. And there you go. To that degree of certainty, it gives you a really clear picture of where somebody is. So as an attorney, if I get up and paint and show a map and we actually talk about the technology behind it to quickly educate whoever it is who's making the determination at the day, but then we show a little map with literally dots painted of where somebody is at a given time, that's pretty powerful, right? So to that degree of messages, the messages may be gone, but the fact the messages occurred likely aren't gone. But then you also have to think, is there somewhere else we can go that the messages were stored, whether it's backed up to the cloud, whether it's on another device? So I don't know if I answered your question because there's about 2 million variables that can come into play.
No, I think that's really helpful. And I found that courts are more interested in, a lot of times, in just the general honesty of a person. And so, for example, let's take the cheating on thing again, and we'll switch to the hidden money next because that's the next most common one. I'll ask a question in discovery right off the bat in most of these cases. Have you had an affair, right, to the other side? And if so, with whom? And they'll, I think these days most people will admit that, especially if that ongoing affair is what kind of was the final straw. Not because they're honest, but because they do have a general sense that, hey, they're going to figure this out at some point, right? Or they've admitted it, But what they'll often do is they'll minimize it, right? Like, oh, it just started a few weeks ago, or I just, it was a very short thing. It didn't really go anywhere. Or this is the first time I've ever had an affair, something like that. When in fact, maybe the truth is they've been in this affair for 2 years, or they've had a series of them. Anyway, so they'll admit it kind of up front, but they'll minimize it. And that's where forensics can often be helpful, I've found, is that we go back and say, oh, well, you said this started 2 months ago. It actually started a year ago, right? Like, we can't, maybe they did delete the text messages, but we can see that there was a lot of activity, a lot of phone calls. yeah, maybe going to visit their place. And judges are not stupid or naive, especially in family law. They figure if there's smoke, there's fire, I think most of the time. So, and that may be very, very helpful if the judge figures, look, this person's lying to me about this issue. Now we have two other issues that we really don't have clear proof on because, whatever, they're hard to prove. I'm just not going to believe that person because I know they're lying to me about one thing, and I'm basically not going to believe anything else they say in the rest of the case, barring them having evidence to prove. It kind of flips the burden of proof, I would say, is sort of the way that works in my view. So that can be very helpful, I think, there to show. On the money stuff, so, I think, first of all, the easiest way to hide money is cash, but not many people deal with large amounts of cash these days. I mean, if you have a spouse who's pulling $1,000 out of an ATM every week, and we don't really have a reason to do that, and that's been going on for years, which I've had cases like that, actually, yeah, we probably do have cash somewhere. More frequently, though, is there's just bank transfers or wire transfers or Venmo or, any number of those things. And these what we typically see is their transfers generally pretty close to the time when they figure that the marriage is going to go down the tubes, generally to family members, often overseas if they have them, or a girlfriend or boyfriend. And those can be tricky to find sometimes. Someone could open up an account, move money into it, transfer it, then close it down. They could do it on things like Venmo or Zelle or whatever that are harder to track. So tell me a little bit about that and your experience with dealing with those type of things.
Yeah, anytime you get in the financial or money world of trying to track and trace money, it's always an interesting game. And the reality is we have to find somewhere to start pulling on a thread. And I think, once you find that thread and start pulling on it, it unravels or can unravel pretty quickly. And so it's a matter of sometimes simply just pulling the devices and simply doing what we call a financial discovery of understanding all the financial institutions that device has been logged into. So whether it's the cell phone, whether it's the computer, even cases where it's the office computer, an individual owns a business, right? Trying to understand all of those financial institutions and then looking at any disclosure, anything that's been given to you as far as those, and finding something that doesn't make sense, or finding their Bitcoin wallets and understanding, okay, what has this wallet transferred and what are these, right? Many spouses have, sadly, don't have any understanding of the financial picture in their home, right? Usually, a lot of times, my experience is one individual's doing it, right? That's not the case all the time, but a lot of times it is. And so it's a matter of how long has it been going on, and finding that particular avenue to start going down. And then from there, we can start looking at logins and get user IDs. And then, as I said earlier, it's a matter of kind of running paperwork. We'll partner. So we actually have an individual on our team that did white collar crime, specifically looking at financials on the FBI side. So we work closely with kind of our forensic findings and then internal auditors and financial accountants to really look in and do the forensic accounting on that side and start tracing that money down from there. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's to pull that thread and start pulling it as hard as you can to see how far you can go.
Yeah, I agree with you. And then sort of the same thing. Then if you find it, then you get the story of, I moved that, $500,000 to my cousin in, wherever overseas who, had an emergency and needed help, right? Then we start getting these crazy stories, which is, again, sort of the same thing. I try to ask those questions up front and get them on the record before we've even figured that out, because, well, maybe sometimes they'll be honest, right? Or tell us half the truth. But more frequently we get a denial of it. And then when we start finding things out, then basically you're right. Then the judge isn't going to believe anything else they say, which is helpful in that part of the case.
I have a question for you, Brian, and just curious, because this is where I find it gets a little bit more tricky. It's very easy once somebody's a W-2 employee and they're tracking money that way, and you can see their payroll. But it gets a little more tricky when they own a business, right?
Yes, very true.
the tracking the money that's spent out of the business account, whether or not it's tied to them or whether it goes to an account the spouse knows about, can oftentimes be more tricky. Do you see a lot of those instances, or do you find that those are more tricky for sure? How, what is your experience in the wild per se of those?
Yeah, I agree. Our if you it's the two easiest ways to move money from a spouse or hide money from a spouse is either cash, like we said, which doesn't really exist anymore, very, very rarely. Most people don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash sitting around. So more frequently is moving money to a family member, often overseas, and saying it's a gift or it's just paying back a loan or whatever. Those you can usually figure out that they occurred. But yes, the most sophisticated ones are probably businesses wholly owned by the spouse, and then they're moving money to non-community. If it's a community-owned business, but they're moving then money to a non-community thing, they're paying a family member, friend, girlfriend, whatever, as a consultant or a vendor. They're making payments of, that look like expenses that are not really, that are just transfers to other family members. If you do that as a business owner, you risk problems with the IRS or other taxing authorities. But my experience with the IRS is that they're mostly have an honor-based tax system. Your chances of being audited, I don't know if I should say this, but it's public record. Your chances of being audited by the IRS are well below 1%. And even if you are audited, I'm not sure they might not find it. So there are very sophisticated ways to do that should be a problem. And in that case, then you need to be looking at the business, following. It's almost an audit essentially, where, okay, well, this is a vendor. They're getting $300,000 a year. We need to contact that vendor. We need to see the invoices. We need to understand what that's being spent on. And of course, they're probably not going to want to cooperate with that. So then we get into all that stuff. So obviously dealing with overseas bank accounts is a big red flag. Dealing with family members is a red flag. Dealing with, Bitcoin or that other type of stuff is crypto type things are, I'm not going to say red flag, but it needs to be understood. It's very sophisticated stuff that may not be that easy to follow. And so, yeah, there's quite a bit of ways you can go down this. And I think most of the time, the vast majority of the time, there's not really issues with this, but it's the few times that there are issues in large enough amounts to make it worth it that's where we really have to be on guard. So
to that point, just to give you a really fast, I know we're running out on time, a really fast, creative way to trace money. Had an interesting story where the communal accounts didn't show anything particular, but we started believing that this individual was not where he was reporting to be when he would go out of town for work. And so we got what's called detail records. And so your cell phone keeps location data. We couldn't get to his phone, but we could pull his cell phone records. And so our cell phone records keep what cell phone tower we're communicating with. And so we actually got to his cell phone records, his call detail records, and we mapped out where he was. And we found he wasn't out of town at the location we thought he was. He was at a completely different location. So then we started saying, okay, let's see the hotel in that area. And we're able to track the hotel that he would have been at, and found that was being paid for an account that we didn't know about, right? And so that's how we got to start looking sometimes to get creative, especially in business instances where there are accounts we don't know about. So there's always a lot of ways in the technology world to get creative, to go after and figure out those financial doors. So I didn't mean to step away, but I wanted to tell you just one avenue is not always the way to approach it. There's oftentimes a lot of different ways to approach something.
I totally agree. And I think that's it. We'll wrap up here, but I think that's a good concept, which is if you know your spouse is being dishonest with you about one thing, that really raises the chances of them being dishonest about other things, number one. And number two, trust your gut instinct. I think that's there for a reason. We're taught in a lot of ways in our society, I think, to just ignore that, look at the, objective things. But if you have a gut instinct about something, it's probably worth looking into. It may or may not be true, but it's true more often than than we might think. So, and you're essentially one way to do that, if to figure out things and get clear answers. Sometimes people also just want peace of mind. Like, I would really like to know what happened. I mean, if my spouse says they weren't cheating on me and I want to believe that, but I have a gut feeling that that's not true. Some people, hey, we're going to get divorced one way or the other, but I really want to know the answer to that, because that's something that's important for me to know. And anyway. Okay, well then, I appreciate it. Thank you. That's all that we have time for today. If you like what you've heard today, do us a favor and leave a review. We appreciate all your feedback, especially when it helps us better the podcast. If you have any questions for Cody or are interested in reaching out to his team at Black Dog Forensics, we will have his contact information in our bio and in this link. And Cody, thank you for joining us today.
Brian, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm Brian Walters. Thanks for listening.
For information about the topics covered in today's episode and more, you can visit our website at waltersgilbreath.com. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of For Better, Worse, or Divorce, where we post new episodes every first and third Wednesday. Do you have a topic you want discussed or a question for our hosts? Email us at podcast@waltersgilbreath.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time.